We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you. And we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Hello, welcome to a new edition of the Right Wing Populist Podcast. I am the Right Wing Populist. So today I want to talk about the BBC. No making fun of the BBC, folks. It is not appropriate to make fun of the BBC's name, okay? The BBC. It'd be funny if I feel like some news network or outlet should call themselves the BWC. Just to make a point. It's I get it, the British Broadcasting Network, I understand why it was called the BBC at the time, but it's maybe you should update the name, folks. Anytime I hear the BBC, I just kind of want to giggle. I remember when I was in college, I had this professor, and he was we had part of our assignments is we had to read articles from the BBC and then do analysis of different articles they did. And I was just like, the BBC? I don't know, man. Every time he would talk about it, I would just kind of laugh in class. Whenever he said the BBC, I would just automatically laugh. I couldn't help myself. The maturity of a 5-year-old. And he would just stare at me. And, with those evil teacher eyes. He was also a big Ukraine fan, which I argued with him about. So he didn't like me. So every time he said, so you need to read this article from the BBC, I would chuckle and, I didn't do well in that class. I'm not sure why exactly, but maybe I do. But I didn't do the best in that class. But anyway, the reason why I want to talk about the BBC, the British Broadcasting Network, is because there's been a little scandal regarding the BBC because they got caught doctoring Trump's January 6th speech. So I want to talk about that, and then I also want to talk about January 6th overall, and what really happened there. And we have other updates regarding some pardons. So I want to talk about that all. But two things. Before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to one of my buddies. I'm not going to say his name. But we call him the Huz. And he just got engaged. Congratulations, bro. He's the most Jewish-looking, non-Jewish person on earth. It's kind of incredible. So shout out to him. I'm not going to say your name just for privacy purposes, but if you're listening, you know who you are. Congratulations, man. I've known you forever. It's been awesome seeing you grow up into who you are today, and I'm really happy for you, man. So congratulations. Second thing, please remember to subscribe to the podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I really freaking appreciate it. So I should have played the clip, and it should be there when the podcast is live, of what the BBC did. Basically, they spliced up Trump's speech at the Ellipse on January 6th, making it seem like Trump was saying we need to go to the Capitol to fight. Okay. But in reality, if you look at what Trump actually said, he said we needed to go to the Capitol to support our congressmen and congresswomen. And what did Trump mean by that? The reason why Trump said we need to go to the Capitol to support the congressmen and congresswomen was because you had people in Congress, Republicans, people like Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, who were objecting to Joe Biden's electors because they were arguing for multiple reasons that Joe Biden's electors were not regularly given because they were given, he won those states because of fraudulent reasons, basically. And Trump supported these efforts to contest the election in Congress. And Democrats have objected to electors in the past, too. In fact, Democrats objected to Trump's 2016 victory. You had objections. You had objections to George W. Bush's victory in 2000, not even just in 2000, but in 2004. Okay. This is not an unusual thing. And Trump was very supportive. Obviously, he wanted Congress to object to Joe Biden's electors. So this idea that Trump would even want there to be a riot, when if anything, all that did was hurt Trump's chances, already slim chances to be fair, but Trump's chances of being successful of objecting to Joe Biden's electors in Congress, that would just be counterproductive. The riot, in fact, we know it was counterproductive because once the riot happened in Congress and it ended, and Congress got back in session to certify, less Republicans were willing to object to Joe Biden's electors. So it really did have the opposite effect of what Trump wanted. And that was sort of the whole point of Trump's speech. I mean, people didn't listen to Trump's January 6th speech. First off, he told people to protest peacefully and patriotically. Okay. So right then and there, it's very hard to argue he incited anything. But the whole point of Trump's speech was to basically give support and to make it clear to Republicans in Congress that your voters support objecting to these electors, so you should do it. That was really the point of Trump's speech. Okay. And, you know, you can argue whether or not it was appropriate for still at the time the sitting president to be putting pressure on Congress to object to electors that he was specifically involved with. You could understand why that's maybe not appropriate, but he told people to be peaceful. That's why Jack Smith, that little piece of shit, couldn't actually charge Trump with inciting the riot. And the reason he couldn't is because Trump told his supporters to be peaceful. So because of that, Jack Smith had to come up with all these ridiculous charges regarding alternative slates of electors to try to get Trump prosecuted. Obviously, it didn't happen. Trump won the election, and Jack Smith was forced to get rid of his case. But let's talk a little bit about alternative electors because it's relevant. Because last night, which it surprised me, Ed Martin posted on Twitter that President Trump pardoned a bunch of people who were involved with the alternative electors, including Rudy Giuliani, Christina Bobb, Jenna Ellis, believe it or not, and John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, Kenneth Chesebro. These were people who have been targeted by Democratic lawfare for the last, 4 years, during the 4-year period that Trump wasn't president anymore. And many of those people I just listed were actually indicted in Georgia and in other states as well, but Georgia specifically. And in fact, Jenna Ellis actually took a plea deal in Georgia so she could avoid any jail time. And she totally threw Trump under the bus, by the way. So the fact that Trump was even willing to pardon her now kind of shows the grace on Trump's part. But for those who don't know, the whole concept of alternative electors wasn't created by Trump's legal team. Alternative electors had been around for many years prior. In fact, in 1962, I believe, or 1960 or 1964. I'm sorry, 1964. When JFK, and I was 1960. I'm sorry, getting my history confused. My apologies. In 1960, there was a very close election between JFK and Richard Nixon, and in fact, Hawaii was so close. How our electoral system works: once a state certifies its victor, the electors from that state, whoever was the winner, whoever those electors represent, whichever candidate, those are the electors that are sent to D.C. for them to be certified later to make the results official. And in Hawaii, the race was so close, they actually sent 2 sets of electors, one for Kennedy, one for Nixon. Okay. So this idea of having competing slate of electors, alternative slate of electors, that wasn't new. That already happened in Hawaii in the 1960s between Kennedy and Nixon. Now, to be fair, Hawaii wasn't, the results didn't hinge on Hawaii's result. Okay, so, Kennedy was still going to be certified the winner, even if Hawaii's election results were overturned in Congress. But the concept of having alternative electors was never considered to be illegal up until Trump decided to do that. In fact, there were people on Al Gore's legal team back in 2000, who, including Lawrence Tribe, by the way, one of the biggest anti-Trumpers around in the legal sphere. But you had people who were, close to Al Gore talking about them using alternative electors in case the Supreme Court case didn't go their way, which it didn't. Now, he didn't actually do it, to be fair, but this has been a concept that's been talked about discussed, and even implemented. Like again, Hawaii, you could look it up. This was not some new concept that a bunch of like kooks in Trump's legal team came up with. Alternative electors, wow, a rare phenomenon. They have happened before, and it's something that's been discussed by many constitutional scholars. So Trump decides to do that because he thinks the election was rigged. And there were some constitutional problems with the election. I don't want to get into the electors clause necessarily because it's sort of a long topic and I'd want to refresh myself. But to me, the best argument against the 2020 election results being valid was the fact that many states changed their election laws to implement mail-in voting without going through the state legislature. And the reason why that's problematic because in the U.S. Constitution, it says state legislatures get to dictate election law for presidential elections. But like I said, a lot of these changes to get mail-in balloting in response to COVID, a lot of these were done through like governor orders, or they had different bodies that put in these laws, or they had votes. But a lot of these changes weren't done through the legislatures of the states, partly because most of the battleground states in 2020, Republicans controlled the state legislatures. So Democrats had to find clever ways to get around it through lawsuits, through governors doing their version of executive orders. And that's how we got all this crazy mail-in balloting. And I will say this, mail-in balloting does make it easier to commit voter fraud. Okay, Jimmy Carter, a good Democrat, had a whole commission breaking it down, why mail-in balloting is just a less secure form of voting. Especially when you're doing it on the fly, like many of these states were doing because of COVID. So Trump had reason to contest the election results, so that's what he did. And on January 6th, all he wanted was his supporters to, go to the Capitol and to show Republicans that, your voters support contesting the election results. But then the riot happens, and there's a lot of questions about what actually happened. I'm not necessarily one of those people that think it was a total setup. I do think fundamentally January 6th was an example of Trump supporters just going out of control and committing violence that was, unacceptable and unnecessary. And, you could understand it to some degree because a lot of the attempts to get some of these constitutional questions litigated in court were dismissed off of procedural grounds from these hack Democrat judges and even some Republican judges that didn't like Trump. So I can understand the frustration, but obviously, again, it was counterproductive to break into the Capitol. It ended with Trump being impeached a second time. And look, the reality is that's what January 6th ultimately was meant to be. It was supposed to be Trump's, his political death knell. He was impeached a second time. It was also used as a way to try to prevent Trump from running for president again. Because there is a clause in the Constitution that says that if you commit insurrection as a government official, you can't hold office again. So some Democrat legal groups and donors funded this effort to get Trump taken off the ballot. It failed. The Supreme Court overturned it. But that's what January 6th was. It was supposed to kill Trump's political career one way or the other. It was meant to try to prevent him from coming back 4 years. Obviously, that didn't work out. He's the president again, so fuck you, libtards. But that's what January 6th was really about. And, when I was in college, again, I would see similar things to what BBC did. I would see professors misquote what Trump said, take things out of context, to try to make it look like that Trump wanted the riot to happen, that he incited it. Well, he didn't incite it. He told people to go to the Capitol to protest peacefully and patriotically and to show our congressmen and women support in their efforts to contest the election in Congress, which you're allowed to do. Congress has a whole mechanism for questioning certain election results if the results are not given in a regular manner. Okay, that's the technical term. That's all Republicans did. That's all Trump did. And luckily, the American people saw through the bullshit and Trump's president again. But I think this BBC, again, LOL, I think this BBC story is important. And it looks like people from the BBC who got caught doctoring the tape they are resigning. In fact, I think Trump had a Truth Social post last night, and this is what he had to say. the top people in the BBC, including Tim Davie, the boss, are all quitting/fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, perfect speech of January 6th. Thank you to the Telegraph for exposing these corrupt journalists, in quotes. These are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scale of a presidential election. On top of everything else, they are from a foreign country, one that many consider our number one ally. What a terrible thing for democracy. That last line is chef's kiss. The trolling. It's terrible for democracy. Bro still has it, bro. That's just like I said, chef's kiss. The subtlety of that is just off the charts. He's the GOAT. That's why he's the GOAT. I'm the anti-democratic force. No, you're the anti-democratic force, BBC. Bruh, he's that's why he's the GOAT. But anyway, I just thought it was important to highlight this because, again, it just shows all the bullshit that the mainstream media has done to try to frame January 6th, at least in regards to what Trump did, as something that it wasn't. Was it a riot? Sure. Was it an insurrection? I don't know. More like a Fedsurrection, if I want to be totally honest. But so anyway, so it's good that Trump's pardoning a lot of these people. You know, the last thing I want to discuss is because Trump won, the Georgia case where he was indicted was basically put on the shelves because he won. And then later, Fani Willis, the lead prosecutor on that case, she got disqualified because she was having an affair with a guy whose penis doesn't work. That's not even like an exaggeration. Like that is, that happened. Maybe you don't want to look it up because the details and all, but that is what happened. So shout out to Fani. You threw away your career to be with a guy who couldn't get it up. Well, that's, trade-offs in life, I guess. But other people that I mentioned were indicted, not just Trump. Some of the names I listed earlier who were part of the alternative electors. So they were good in the Georgia case after she got disqualified because that totally cooked the case. The case is gone. The case is never coming back in Georgia. But there were other states where some of these people were also indicted. Arizona, I believe Michigan, I think even Nevada. And, Trump, he just pardoned them federally, but those pardons only work for federal crimes, not state crimes. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with some of these other quote-unquote fake elector cases going forward where they're trying to criminalize Trump's contesting of the election results. I haven't heard much progress regarding them. And considering Trump just won all these states last year, to me that was sort of meant to send a message to some of these Democratic AGs in these states to back off the lawfare. But I don't know. I maybe tomorrow I'll do some research and give an update on some of these other alternative elector cases. But anyway, so that's sort of my thoughts on the BBC getting caught and just what a nightmare the January 6th shit was. It was meant to destroy Trump's political career, and the media went along with it, like the BBC did, by trying to doctor what Trump actually said and did. So it's happy to see there being, like Trump said, shout out to the Telegraph for helping exposing it. It's good to see. The BBC sucks anyway. It has a funny name, but other than that, not much else going for it. So, yeah. So that's going to be it for today. Thanks for listening, folks. Again, please remember to subscribe, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. I really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow.